Good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. It's Thursday, August the 6th, 2020, and we are studying about angels and their appearances throughout the Bible. We are working our way through the Old Testament currently, and I think today my plan is to finish up the Old Testament and then possibly Monday, maybe tomorrow, I don't know, but maybe Monday, get back to or start into the New Testament. So just looking at some thoughts here that we've already posted the last few days. Not going to go over it all again, but just the general information that we have about angels throughout both Testaments. Angels are innumerable, created spirit beings who are neither human nor divine, that were involved in the revelation of God's will and the accomplishment of His purposes. And we've been noticing that. Yesterday we went from Genesis to Exodus to into Numbers. And we're going to look at some different passages today from the Old Testament. You have different classes of angels revealed to us in Scripture, different names by which angels are called or ways they are identified throughout Scripture. So, like I said, we've covered pretty much the Pentateuch, and we're going to move on today. One of the reasons I think we can move on is because the more and more I've studied this topic, we see this one angel of the Lord appearing from Genesis to Zechariah and Malachi, I guess I'd say Zechariah, throughout your Old Testament. Most of the angelic appearances in the Old Testament are this angel of the Lord, which I discussed yesterday would be a reference to Jesus before He took on flesh. He was known, John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, as the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus, the way we know Him, or the way we typically think of Him as a Jewish man who was born of Mary, walked through Israel. Before He was born, He was not Jesus. He would be named Jesus. The angel instructed Joseph of that in Matthew chapter 1. But before that, He was the Word. He was not in the flesh, but He took on flesh. So anyway, I think most of the appearances of the angel of the Lord throughout the Old Testament are a reference to the pre-fleshly Christ. So glad to see people joining in here, Lyle and Edith and Charles. Glad you guys are on here, and others who are watching and not commenting. If you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to add them here as we go through our study. All right, so angels in the rest of the Old Testament. I'm going to go one by one here, and we're not going to read every verse. We're just going to note particular things from each verse or from each passage that we look at. So for some reason, I'm in Colossians, but I've got Judges on the screen here. So I'm going to go back to Judges chapter 2. This is a time of, it's basically a very dark time in Israel's history, about 400 years of history. The angel of the Lord appears multiple times throughout the book of Judges, guiding, revealing things to these judges, leading them in certain ways, things like this. And so that's important to understand. But Judges chapter 2 and verse 1. It says, "Then the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochum and said, I led you up from Egypt." Okay, so we looked at that yesterday, and we looked at the book of those books of the wilderness wandering, and noted that is a reference to Christ. Particularly, we noticed that throughout the book of Exodus, that the angel of God's presence was with them. This is the angel that appeared to Moses in the burning bush, where his very presence made the ground holy. Same thing with Joshua in Joshua chapter 5. This is that angel that we see throughout the book of Judges. Not only here talking to the Israelites at large, but then you go over to Judges chapter 5 and verse 23, and Deborah, one of the female judges of Israel, after her victory, in Judges 5:23, mentions the angel of the Lord. So again, I think that's a reference to the same individual. You get to Judges chapter 6, and really verses 11 through 22, as I have there on the screen. But this angel of the Lord is mentioned multiple times throughout this particular passage. And again, it's in the process of revealing a message from God. And I can't help but think that this is the same angel of the Lord that's talked about in Judges 2 and verse 1 and throughout the wilderness wanderings, the pre-fleshly Christ. Then you go to Judges chapter 13 and the revelation about Samson to his parents. And you read there, as I have on the screen, Judges 13 verses 3 through 22. Just for instance, verse 3, the angel of the Lord. And again, this is very specific. This doesn't say an angel. The angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her. And you see that again down in verse 9. You see it in verse 13 and verse 16 and verse 17. I mean, just time and time again, this angel of the Lord is referenced. And to me, one of the important things in this particular passage, is kind of interesting, is in Judges chapter 13 and verse 18. The angel of the Lord, so Manoah, Samson's father, says, hey, can we know your name? The angel of the Lord, Judges 13:18, said to him, why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful? Wonderful. Okay, so that takes my mind to Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 6, where there's a prophecy of Christ, and it says, unto us a son is born, unto us a child is given, unto us a son is born, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be Counselor, Mighty God, Wonderful. And this word means in the Hebrew, incomprehensible. You know, there are only two angels named in the Bible. We've covered that previously, Gabriel and Daniel. This angel, who is, again, the angel of the Lord, how can I tell you my name, seeing that it is incomprehensible? It's wonderful. I couple that with Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7. I think this is the pre-fleshly Christ. The next appearance, and this is actually, I have two references here on your screen, 2 Samuel 24, 1 Chronicles 21. The reason that is because it's a parallel account. The end of 2 Samuel and then 1 and 2 Kings and 1 and 2 Chronicles, there are a lot of parallel accounts. This is one of those parallel accounts. David is king, and he decides to take a census of Israel. God had always forbidden that. And even Joab objected to it. Don't do this thing. Well, David overrides him, and he takes the census. And so he was given an option of 3 different punishments for Israel because of his sin. And what he chose was an angel striking Israel for a certain amount of time and a great number of dead people. Again, I can't help but wonder if this is that angel that Joshua saw in Joshua chapter 5 with the sword drawn in his hand. This is the angel of the Lord. But there's just another reference to angels in the Old Testament. And again, I think this is that reference to pre-fleshly Christ. Now, this one's interesting. I'm going to turn to this one. 1 Kings chapter 13 and verse 18. Of course, there's a lot more. A lot of these are single verses that I'm pointing out. And obviously, there's a lot more context around them. I don't have time. I'm not going to take the time to examine every single context of every mention of angels. This is just kind of an overview of what we're reading here. But in 1 Kings chapter 13 and verse 18, you have a reference to 2 prophets. You have an older prophet and a younger prophet. And this younger prophet was sent on a very specific mission, things he was told to do, things he was told not to do. This older prophet deceives him. How does he deceive him? He says, I too am a prophet as you are, and an angel spoke to me by the word of the Lord, saying, bring him back with you to your house, that he may eat bread and drink water. He was lying to him. That is, the older prophet was lying to the younger prophet. The younger prophet was told to go do his mission and then get back, and don't stop along the way. He was deceived by an older prophet who said, an angel told me this. All right, so insert there Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. Where Paul is talking about the message of the gospel. And he says, if anyone preaches any other gospel unto you, even if it's an angel from heaven, preaches a different gospel, let him be accursed. This is a prime example of what Paul was talking about there. Of course, this is under the old law and we're under the new, but you understand what we're saying here. People have and will continue to use supposed messages from angels to deceive people. or messages, direct communication from God today. Again, I think one of the key verses in studying angels and their role in revealing God's will is Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. And I've quoted that many, many times in this study already, but we have to have a firm grasp on that passage. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in times past unto the fathers by the prophets. And that's what we're noting throughout all of these Old Testament passages. A variety of times and a variety of ways. Many times, God communicated to people through angels. That's Hebrews 1:1. But then you have to move right on into verse 2. Has in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also created the worlds. God does not speak through angels anymore. It does not happen. The Bible tells us it doesn't happen. So when people like this old prophet here in 1 Kings 13:18 says, hey, an angel told me, you can know for certain that they are wrong. You can know for certain that they are misled and that they are trying to mislead you. Don't fall for it. Two passages dealing with the prophet Elijah here. 1 Kings 19:5-7 and 2 Kings chapter 1, verses 3 and 15. And again, so many of these appearances of angels with a specific message or specific action I think, could be directly tied into the pre-fleshly existence of Christ. So in 1 Kings chapter 19, you have Elijah has just defeated the prophets of Baal, the prophets of Jezebel, 850 prophets. We typically talk about the 450 prophets of Baal. And that's kind of misleading because as you read the text in 1 Kings chapter 18, and you read verses 18 through 19, it says, let's see. Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me on Mount Carmel, the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table. There were 850 prophets that Elijah defeated and were, of course, ultimately put to death. So then Jezebel puts out a price on Elijah's head, and he goes in hiding. So as he's in that process of hiding, verse 5, 1 Kings 19:5, as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. And then it happens again in down through verse 7, and again Elijah's communicated to by an angel. 2 Kings chapter 1, verses 3 and 15. Every appearance of angels in the Bible has to do with something along these lines. A revelation from God or some fulfillment of God's purpose. Just like, for instance, I'll use my cursor here, 2 Samuel 24 and 1 Chronicles 21, the angel of the Lord was used to strike Israel for punishment of David's sin. That angel was accomplishing God's purpose. All right, 2 Kings chapter 19. In this passage here, you can see I've actually got three different references. Again, this is one of those parallel passages, paralleled in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, but then Isaiah is actually writing about it in his day. All right, so Isaiah records it as well. So I'm going over to 2 Kings chapter 19, and let me see, verse 35. The Assyrians have surrounded Israel. They're being intimidated, but Israel is assured. Hezekiah, of course, is king at this time. They're assured that Assyria will not destroy them. So this occurs. 2 Kings 19, verse 35. It came to pass on a certain night that the angel of the Lord went out and killed in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when people arose early in the morning, there were the corpses, all dead. So, three different passages reference that event, and it's interesting because there's actually, one of the interesting things about this account is that there's actually secular verification of the end of this siege of Jerusalem. I believe it's called Sennacherib's Prism. Talks about all of his victories and battles, and then the record stops at Jerusalem for some reason. I think the Bible reveals that reason for us. All right, I'm moving on to Psalm chapter 8 and verses 4 and 5. And I've used this passage a couple of times in this study to help us understand the nature of angels, because people, frankly, I would say a lot, I don't know if I'd say most, but many people misunderstand the nature of angels. A lot of people have the concept that when a human dies, they become an angel. And it's interesting, this has happened to me, I don't know how many times over the years. You go to a funeral of a person who has lived a life, so none of us are perfect. We understand that. There's no squabble there. But you go to funerals sometimes and you know the manner of life that a person has lived. Not a good one sometimes. And yet when they die, whoever's doing the funeral service just preaches them right into heaven. I mean, let's just call it what it is. Say what people do. I've been in situations where a person was an adulterer, a drunk, just not a good person. They didn't go to church anywhere. But when some pastor was hired to do the funeral, boy, he just preaches them right into heaven. And this person's become an angel. Man, you talk about giving some people some false hope. There's a lot of false hope given at funerals these days. Anyway, one of the great misunderstandings that people have is that when we die, specifically Christians, that we become angels. And that is never taught in the Bible. Angels, it's taught throughout Scripture that angels are not humans. They are not like humans. And it's never taught that humans become angels. All right. So Psalm chapter 8 and I'll just start in verse 3. It says, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you visit him?" David is looking at himself in comparison to all of the physical creation. And I can do that. You can do that for yourself. Consider how vast and even to an extent unknown the universe is. And then here I am. I'm going to be here for what's the typical life average? 70, 80 years? What is man that you are mindful of him? What caused God to do this? Well, we know from John 3:16. But anyway, the Son of Man that you visit him. Now, Psalm 8 verse 5. "For you have made him a little lower than the angels." That has to do with the nature of man as compared to the nature of angels. As we've said throughout this study, angels are not divine beings. They are not God. They are not gods. Humans are even lower than angels, though. And we don't become angels when we die. We are different beings. Again, angels, Hebrews 12:22, an innumerable company of angels. Humans are their own class of being. Angels are their own class of being. The divine deity, the Godhead, Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 20, the Godhead, they are their own class of eternal, all-powerful beings. Neither angels nor humans are. And angels and humans are not the same, and humans don't become angels when they die. We need to understand that and stop giving people false hope about what's going to be like after this life is over. They're not going to get wings. They're not going to get halos. They're not going to get harps. They're not going to get their own personal cloud. So many misunderstandings that people have, and that really they truly believe, that do not come from the Bible. Not anywhere in Scripture. All right, I'm going to move on to Psalm 103 here. Look at a couple verses. Verses 20 and 21. Just had a comment come up there. Glad to see you on here, Wayne. Hope you're doing well. And Owsley's watching at the lake. All right, Psalm 103, 20. "Bless the Lord, you his angels." Now notice this. "Who excel in strength." Okay, and I've talked about that some in this series of videos, but angels are superhuman in their strength and in their ability. But again, they're not divine. They're not deity. They excel in strength, but then it says this, "who do his word, heeding the voice of his word." Angels are subject to God, and they are accomplishing His purpose with superhuman strength. Bless the Lord, all His works, in all places of His dominion. Bless the Lord, O my soul. So again, angels are a different class of being than humans. They are ministers of God. Then you turn to the next page, Psalm 104, verse 4. I'll start in verse 3, talking about God, that He lays the beams of His upper chambers in the waters, who makes the clouds His chariot, who walks on the wings of the wind, who makes His angels spirits, and His ministers a flame of fire. And that passage is actually referenced in Hebrews chapter 1. Angels are God's ministers, God's servants. That is their role. Here's the thing, how they accomplish it, what they are doing. There are details given in the Bible that they're doing those things, but we're not always told how. They're ministering, and we're going to talk more about that when we get to the New Testament next week. But, it's clear. His angels are spirits, and His ministers, His servants, are a flame of fire. They are involved in the work of God in a variety of ways. And then I'm going to go to Daniel chapter 3. And this is going to be the last passage I look at in the Old Testament in regard to the word angels. We're going to go through the Old Testament and look at cherubim too, and seraphim. But we're just looking at the word angels for right now. So, of course, Daniel chapter 3 is when Nebuchadnezzar has made this great statue, and he demands everybody in the kingdom to bow down and worship this statue. Of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refuse, and they're thrown into the fiery furnace. All right? So let's see, Daniel 3 and verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent His angel and delivered His servants who trusted in Him. And they have frustrated the king's words and yielded their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. This is the occasion when you look back and, really beginning in verse 19, when they are thrown into the furnace, they're thrown in bound. Verse 23, they fall down into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. The people who took them there died because the heat of the furnace was so great. And then Nebuchadnezzar is astonished, verse 24, and he arose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? Yes. Look, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God, verse 25 it says. And the Hebrew actually reads there, is like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar is not talking about the Son of God here. Jesus was not the Son of God at this point. The New King James misses it here. He looks like a son of the gods. And that phrase is used a couple of other times in the book of Daniel too. It's the angel of the Lord that delivered them. And so then you go over to Daniel chapter 6, the second passage that I have here. This is where Daniel is thrown into the lion's den because of his prayer practices. All right? And you read the text. We're not going to read all of the surrounding context, but verses 21 and 22, the king rushes to the den to see what Daniel's case is. And Daniel says, O king, live forever. My God has sent His angel and shut the lion's mouth, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before Him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. And so I just place it here as a question on our little PowerPoint screen here. Pre-fleshly Christ? Very possible. It's not that anything in the text specifically states that, but this is a powerful being who delivers God's servants from a fiery furnace, and who then delivers Daniel from a lion's den. Very possible. And like I said, I do believe that most of the appearances of the angel in the Old Testament is a reference to the pre-fleshly Christ, the Word, as He's called in John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. Okay, so like I said, that's what I wanted to cover today. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here in just a minute. I'm just pulling out my outline real quick. Hosea. Okay, so here's an important passage. So back in Genesis chapter 32, we're told that a man appeared to Jacob, and Jacob wrestled with him that night. Well, you go to Hosea chapter 12 and verse 4, and we're told that Jacob wrestled with the angel of God. Now you go back to Genesis, and Jacob's response to that was, I have seen God face to face. Again, I think that's a reference to that angel of the Lord that we've been talking about. And then throughout Zechariah, the book of Zechariah is very similar to the book of Revelation in the appearances of angels, in the appearances of different signs and symbols, the messages and how they were given to Zechariah and to John. But angel appears in Zechariah chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 12. So, there are several people who have requested copies of the PDF version of my outline. If anybody else wants one, I'll be happy to send it to you. But it'll cover all of those other passages. Throughout the Old Testament, 15 books of your Old Testament, angels are mentioned. What we're going to do is we're going to move into the New Testament on our next video. And again, I need to decide what it may be tomorrow, it may be Monday. I'll just have to see how things work out. And we start right in the first page of the New Testament, Matthew chapter 1, seeing angels involved in the revelation of God's will and in the accomplishment of His purposes, just like the Old Testament. Okay, well, I appreciate all of you joining in today on the live stream. If you have any further questions or comments once it's over, you'll still be able to comment here on this video. And as I always say, if you have someone who would like to do this or would like to access this content, be uploaded there along with all the others. So I appreciate you being here today and hope you have a good day, and we may see you tomorrow as we start looking at angels in the New Testament.